What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over a basic minimap system quite like the one we did in the action RPG / third person tutorial series. It's going to be slightly different, but for the most part it will be the same. So if you watch that one, you'll know how we're going to implement this today, or at least have a very good idea. So what we're going to do is essentially attach an actual camera above our character's head, and it is going to keep track of our player's position. We're then going to hide the player in other skeletal meshes, and then allow the camera to render, basically take everything that the camera can see, render it to a material called our render target, and that will be applied to the HUD. That way we can see our minimap. Now this is the basic method. When we're looking at this, it looks pretty good, but it can be pretty costly, especially in multiplayer scenarios. You don't want to render all these additional cameras and all these additional scenes. So we will show a more advanced method in the very near future for minimaps. You'll be able to do a lot more with them than just this, but this will be our basic starting point so that we know how minimaps can work, one method of doing them, and also get us familiar with render targets and scene capture components. If you'd like to get caught up to the series, I'll leave this playlist right here in the top right corner. This is episode 35 of the first person shooter. We have many episodes to go. We're not even close to being done this one, but this playlist will keep track of all the progress that we do. Otherwise, I advise checking out this episode right here where we set up the HUD for our first-person shooter series, because we are going to need that today to actually display this mini-map somewhere. Okay, and we can go ahead and get started. So the first thing we need to do today is go into our base character BP. We've had him like this for a few episodes now, but we're going to add a few things to him. We're actually not going to touch anything in the event graph, so we don't have to worry about that today. Otherwise, we're going to be touching a lot of things in his component list here. So you're going to go to your character, you're going to go to your component list and check them out. And this has to be done a very specific way for this to work, because making things children of other things can impact their behavior, and we need the behavior to be spot on for this. So let's be careful how we do this here. We want to add a spring arm component to our character, but we don't want it to be a child of anything other than the capsule component. So you don't want to put it on the mesh here. You technically could, for the record, but we don't want to do that, because if we do, we're going to have to change a few additional things that we don't have to do if we just make it a child of the capsule component. So what I like to do is click on the component I want to make it a child of, like the capsule component, add component, and type in spring arm. What a spring arm is you can read this, but it's basically what you would imagine it to be in real life. Say you have an arm like for a camera or for a microphone. You know, you can get the long arms, and so you can place them other things. That's essentially what a spring arm does. You put this here, and then we can attach something to the end of it or to a specific part of it to allow us to look at things from a different perspective, or you can even play sounds from different areas based on the fixed distance that the spring arm has. So we're doing this, that way we can basically put a camera at the end of the spring arm, and that's going to then display the cursor for our player on top of the minimap. So this camera is going to capture the whole scene, and for that we need a scene capture component 2D. So here's your spring arm. I then click on the spring arm and add a scene capture component 2D. Okay. There are some things we can change on these to make our minimap look a lot nicer, but don't worry about those for now. Just get these in place. That way we have the spring arm and we have the scene capture component. We have to make sure that everything is facing where we would like it to face. So for the spring arm, we want it to be above our character, basically like it's a top-down shooter. By default, its position rotation is going to look something like this. And your camera, your scene capture component 2D, will be behind it, because the scene capture component, being a child of the spring arm, will place it at the end of the spring arm, which is what we want. But you can tell this is not what we want, because if we look at this, look how weird that looks. Because we are not on the right, we're not looking at the right spot and feeding it to the render target. So we need to instead have the camera facing down on top of our character. Easiest way to do this is to just rotate the spring arm. So 270 degrees on the y-axis is rotating it up for me, and the camera will automatically be positioned in the right spot. Now, if you rotated it first and put the scene capture component 2D on afterward, it might have a rotation. Like, it could have some random, seemingly random rotation like this. And you're like, what the heck? Like, what's all that doing? It doesn't really matter. Sometimes when you put things on after you've moved the coordinates of a parent component, it will then make the rotation or location super weird for the child components. You want to just zero that out. You can either hit the yellow arrow there or just literally type 0 for everything here. And then what should happen is the spring arm should be completely vertical, and the scene capture component 2D should be looking down at the character. Alright, once you have those two main things, the rest we can cover in a second. Let's get the minimap working and viewable. That way we can play around with the settings that we actually want. So it's all well and good that we have a camera that can capture the scene around our character, but we need to actually make it so we can display that somewhere, such as on our HUD. And to do that, we can use something called a rendered target. So I made a minimap folder, and I made a render target in here, which you can do by going add, import, miscellaneous, or excuse me, materials and textures, and then render target. Once you do this, you'll get something right here. It won't have an image yet. It'll be black. You can call it whatever you want. I called it minimap render target. It's pretty much the standard naming procedure that I've always seen and always used. You don't have to change anything on here, so don't worry about it, but we just need it to exist. That way we can actually feed this to our scene capture component 2D, and then it can have the proper result. You can see it's actually kind of rendering the scene right now, because that's exactly what it's doing. If we go to our scene capture component 2D and scroll down to the scene capture area, then it has this section called texture target, which is empty currently. It'll look like this. What we want to do is put in the minimap render target that we just made, compile and save that. What's going to happen is this render target should now have some sort of image. It might have an image with your character here or your environment around you, but it should fill out eventually. It doesn't always happen right away, so you don't have to worry if you don't see it, but basically this is going to fill out with what this scene capture component can see. However, we can't just put a render target on top of our HUD, so we need to make a material out of it, and we can put that on the HUD. You can literally right click on a render target and create material. It's that simple. Once you do that, I called mine m_minimap render target. Capital M underscore is usually it's a pretty standard name for material. So it's just a naming convention. You don't have to call it that, but that's why I called it that. Now, when you come in here, it's going to be on surface, and it will technically work like this, but it's going to be this cube, this sphere, and we need to display it on our HUD, so we want it to be flat. There's a super simple way to do this. We just go to the material domain and we switch it to user interface. Now it'll be a nice flat image. It actually will be not plugged in correctly on occasion when you come in here. I don't know why that is. So if you're getting black and you're saying that there's no lines from the texture sample to the minimap render target here, all you do is drag the RGB into the final color. Literally that simple. And it should show up. Just be aware of that. You can play around with post-processes and other things to change how this actually looks if you want. So I'm not going to do that for today, but just so you're aware, you could do, for example, let's say we want to color burn it. I can put this in here. And I could go ahead and change all the parameters that I want. So make it pink or something. And then you can see that I can actually see what the map looks like in real time. And it's still the mini map, but it's got all this distortion on it, these different colors. It's literally that simple. So you can play around with it if you'd like. This is super, super simple. And again, I just randomly threw something in here. So feel free to take your time with it, but just be aware that's something fun you could do if you don't like the standard look of the realistic camera. Anyway, once this material is done, we have to apply this to our HUD. So I'll open up your character HUD widget. We had everything on here in the past except for this. So everything's the same as it was. I moved over my 2 ability images / buttons. That way they are out of the way and I could put the minimap in the bottom left corner. But all you do is you drag an image onto the screen. I call it minimap image, left it a variable. For the image or the brush, what you actually do is you pick that new material that we just made. And so this material will update as the render target updates. You can change the size and position as I have, but of course that's entirely cosmetic, so that's up to you where you put it. Now, when you come into here, I'm going to reset a few things. All right, so I've reverted everything to the way it is at that point. So this is what you should see, or something similar to this. You should see everything from a top-down view where you put your minimap image on your HUD. So you can see as I move my character around, the character is doing what you would expect, and I can see the objects around me. Again, this is just a camera rendering to our HUD. So it's basically, it's going to be everything that you actually have in here. It's pretty cool. I actually always have liked this view. But that's not necessarily what we want. And it's very, like I said, it's very costly. So we're going to make this where we can have an icon to represent our player as opposed to just showing the mesh. Also, a few things. You realize I'm always walking forward no matter how I rotate. That could be fine if that's what you want. However, a lot of games will have it so that the map stays, it doesn't rotate, but the player icon rotates. That way you can rotate around and see what direction you're heading, you know, north, east, south, or west, or whatever it may be. So we're going to cover both of those things right now. The first thing that you need to do is go into your base character BP. And we need to click on our spring arm. And we want to uncheck inherit pitch, inherit yaw, and inherit roll. That's because these, what they do is they make this spring arm inherit the pitch, yaw, and roll, the rotation of the parent component. So of the capsule component, which rotates as the character rotates. So we don't want that to rotate. We don't want the spring arm to rotate. So now when I rotate my character, the camera, the minimap, the HUD, all that stays as you would expect it. You're not seeing the minimap rotate around what the character is doing. So they have a given direction, the minimap is staying in place. That's one thing. Next thing that's fun to do is to make it where we hide the skeletal meshes. Now, you may or may not want to do this. This could be up to you. You can also get more specific with it and hide you know, very specific things. But the reason you can hide a skeletal mesh, or you may want to do this, is because if we're changing the character out for the player icon, then we don't want to have the mesh. There's actually lighting that you can see. So you can see the lighting on this character is still being rendered. That won't be an issue because we're going to put the player icon right over it, but there are ways to also take care of that. When we get into the advanced minimap, you'll realize that this isn't an issue anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it for now. But feel free to check out the settings if you want to learn more. And so the way that you actually do this, since I did it very quickly, on the scene capture component 2D, you see the details panel. If you scroll down to the scene capture section, there'll be a little down arrow you can hit right here. And once you do that, you'll have more options called flags. So you have general show flags, advanced show flags, all these other ones. In general, there's one for skeletal meshes. You just uncheck it and it won't display on that camera. All right, and now the other thing we want to do is add a sprite, and that's our player icon. That way we can actually display that on the minimap as opposed to our character. So what we need to do is make the sprite. So I have a new folder called Minimap in my art section, and I've uploaded this image. All you have to do is put this into the folder you want in the file explorer, or you can actually upload it. And this is just a picture I had on my computer. I made this in PowerPoint very quickly. Once you get the image in here, it'll come in as a texture. Now that's fine, but we can actually make it a sprite. That way we can literally just attach it to our character. So you can right click on any texture, go to sprite actions and create sprite. To do that, you get this thing, which I've called Minimap Cursor Sprite. And it's literally what you'd imagine. It's a sprite of that texture. And now we can apply this right to our character without any issue. To do that, we want to make sure we're not selecting the spring arm when we add this next component. We want to add it again as a child of the capsule component, not the spring arm. So you can see the player icon is separate from them. So click on capsule component, type sprite, and we want paper sprite. I already have one, so you see it's trying to add this minimap cursor sprite here. But when you actually do it without the icon, it'll just say paper sprite. That's the one you want. You don't want the paper group sprite. And then I've changed it to be player icon as the name. In the source sprite, you just pick the sprite. This will be the only one that shows up unless you have other sprites in your project. Then you have to find the one that you want. From here, you can also change your color if you'd like. So there we go. I have my pink player icon. All right, so at this point, you can see that the sprite is huge. It is there, and it is working. But there are a few things that we may not want to do. Like, for example, we probably don't want to be able to see this above us in the sky, although it is pretty cool. And we also don't want it to be massive, even though it is working. It is rotating properly and all that, but yeah, we probably don't want it to actually look like this. There's a few things we can do to fix those up as well. You can go ahead and change these settings now to adjust the size, the location, all that as you'd like. That's up to you. Very simple. However, at the end of the day, you're just going to basically get a size that you want unless you have a standardized size. There's not really a better way to do this. You're just going to change the size. Like I can change them all to 1. And you can see it's even bigger. And now it takes up the entire minimap. I chose 0.2 because I thought that was a good value. Also, when you add the sprite, make sure that the rotation is correct. It's going to start out something like this, which technically you won't be able to see because it is 2D. And the way our camera is facing, it's going to just be like cut down the middle like this. So what you need to do is make sure it's facing the proper direction. For me, if you rotate it 90 on the X, it's going to flatten it, but then it won't be facing exactly the correct orientation. You also have to add 270 on the Z. You'll know it's facing the right way because the Z-axis, or whatever axis you decide to do, you know, whatever lines up with your image, you're going to have an arrow that faces the front of it is going to face the front of the arrow here on the character. That is the front of this actor. Okay. So once you get your sprite aligned with the front of the character, you know it's in the right spot. Like I said, change your size, your location, whatever, to make it look right. And then you're looking pretty good, except for the size is still going to be pretty massive at this point because we still have depth and height applied to our minimap, which is kind of cool. You can see as I jump, it zooms out, or really gets higher. But that's actually not what we want in most cases. So on the scene capture component 2D, we can change the projection type to orthographic. And when we do that, it is then going to make everything flat. So the sizes of things are going to change because it's not going to try and use the height of objects. As I jump, nothing changes. It's just using my location to print out the camera data. Okay, it's not taking into effect how high up I am or anything like that. You can change the ortho width to change how much this affects. So if I make it really high, then everything becomes really small because it adds more width to what the camera can see in this flat plane. So it's kind of cool for being able to zoom out on the minimap, but you most likely don't want it that far away. The standard is fine for me. Last additional thing that we can fix up is being able to see the sprite in the sky here. We don't want to be able to see it, and really we don't want others to be able to see it. We just want to see it on the minimap. But for now, a quick fix is to go to the sprite, scroll down here until you get to rendering. You have visible and hidden in game. There's a little show advanced arrow. You click that and it allows you to change who can see it. We don't want the owner to be able to see it. This isn't multiplayer at the current time, so the only one we care about is the owner, which is us. And so now when we look up, if owner no see is checked, then guess what? The owner cannot see the sprite. but it's still being able to be rendered onto the HUD by the scene capture component because the camera can still see it. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. So that's how you can make your basic mini-map. So if you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else, and I'd really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for everything that you do. I really, really appreciate all the assistance, and I'm glad you guys are excited to check out all these episodes week after week. If you had any issues with any of the content in this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description. It's completely free, and I'd be happy to assist you. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.